Why do various governments and companies use rockets to get stuff to space, instead of a variety of other methods people have attempted or imagined? As discussed previously, the real goal of getting stuff to space is usually getting it to orbit. This involves not only getting up into space, but going really fast sideways, a much trickier proposition. Your first instinct when thinking about this problem might be to build a real version of our imaginary cannon from the previous video. However, firing a cannon or cannon-like device fast enough to reach orbit runs into several problems, most of which stem from the fact that all of the energy a cannonball will ever have during its flight has to be imparted when it is fired. This is a key point about cannons and is their fundamental limitation. Imparting enough energy to a projectile when it is fired, that it is still traveling at orbital speeds once it passes above the atmosphere, would mean accelerating quickly enough to kill any living passengers and destroy any sensitive machinery on board. It would also mean hitting the atmosphere so quickly upon exiting the cannon that the projectile would burn up and explode without heavy shielding. Finally, even with shielding, the turbulence of such a launch and the lack of onboard thrust would make the trajectory difficult to precisely predict. These issues, combined with the extreme complexity of engineering any sort of cannon large enough for an orbital launch, make the cannon idea difficult in practice. The solution is rockets. Unlike a cannon, rockets carry their fuel with them, and as a result, can impart energy to a payload smoothly throughout their flight, and even change directions. This allows a rocket to eschew heavy shielding during launch by moving relatively slowly near the surface of the Earth, where the atmosphere is thickest, then speeding up once energy is no longer being lost to air resistance. It also means that a rocket can spread its acceleration throughout the duration of the flight, rather than concentrating it in a life and equipment-destroying burst at launch, and can provide thrust for the precise amount of time necessary to achieve a very specific speed, and therefore a very specific orbit. Unfortunately, carrying all that fuel means that a rocket can only launch a relatively small, useful payload into orbit, since most of its energy is used to lift all of its fuel. This relationship is described mathematically by something called the Tsiolkovsky rocket equation. Well, you might ask, surely there's a better solution. It turns out, if you care about price or reliability, there isn't with current technology. While there are various other exotic solutions that would work in principle, including putting cannons on very tall mountains, launching rockets from airplanes, or building giant elevators to orbit, so far, the safest, cheapest, and most reliable method of launching an object to orbit involves rockets.